I would like to talk to you today, as briefly as I can within the time that I have, on what a person looks like who truly is that kind of influence in society. But I want to read for you a few verses from Scripture before I get into that. It is the story of Daniel as he stood before Nebuchadnezzar and indeed before the very nation of Babylon, as the challenge was given to them and they were sought out to be remolded and reshaped. Take a notice of what happened. These men were in exile, and all of a sudden the highest man in the land is asking for the best of these young men to be selected, strong in their countenance, impressive in their personality. And what was it that was going to take place? They were to be reprogrammed and a new set of values planted within them. They were to be taught the philosophy, the literature, and the language of the Babylonians. Philosophy, the way they reason. Literature, through the back door of the imagination. And the entire change of culture could begin once that language was handed to them. The philosophy, literature, and language to help these men rethink all that there was to be challenging them within this new culture, so that a new set of values would be born into them and then transferred through them to the next generation. The Bible says this: "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, 'I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you.'" He goes on to show how Daniel reasoned with him. And then in verse 17, "To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service in every matter of wisdom and understanding, about which the king questioned them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters of his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus." Percy Bysshe Shelley, the great poet, penned these words, which we are almost seeing unfold even to this very day. He said, "I met a traveler from an antique land, who said, 'Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that the sculptor well those passions read, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." You can go to the Middle East today and see the broken statues of one-time demagogues, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that the sculptor well those passions read. They come and go. They stand with an authoritarianism, a demagogic splendor given to themselves. And all of a sudden rebellion comes. As they're overthrown, you just see them somewhere in desert terrain. It's one side of the picture. And there's another side of it. Who are the ones who can dare stand before them with the conviction of God's truth and reaching out with a love that God alone is big enough to plant in a heart like that? I just returned from the former Soviet Union in Moscow. Came back 2 days ago. About to leave in 2 days from now to China. And I look at all that those nations represent in demagogues and how they have stood individuals before them who've changed history. In the year 2000, Russia started to release its political prisoners. In the midst of them was a man called Andres Tamas, who had been incarcerated for 55 years. He was a Hungarian. He was talking gibberish. And finally, somebody said, execute him. He is of no use to anyone. But somebody said, at least bring in a psychiatrist to examine him before you choose to execute him. So they went and brought a Hungarian psychiatrist. He stayed with Thomas for a few days, and he came out and said, you know what? He's not insane. He's not talking gibberish. He's talking an old Hungarian dialect. You have nearly driven him insane. You brought him in here when he was 20. He has now lived in near solitary confinement for over 50 years. Give him back to us. We will make him well. Andres Tamas was put into a wheelchair and being taken out. What do you think was the first request he made? If you have not heard the story, the first request he made was for a mirror. He had not seen a mirror since the age of 20. He looked into the mirror for a fraction of a moment and then turned it away, buried his face in his hands, and sobbed uncontrollably. What do you think it would be like for over half a century not to look at your own reflection in some way? You start off in the robust virility of youth, and now you're a wizened old man looking at all that time has extracted and exacted from you. You know, we take for granted a mirror. We get up every morning, do our necessary ablutions, put on innocent forms of disfigurement, and we walk out of there to look like what we wished we did. And yet, when you come back from a long journey, you realize you actually resemble your passport picture much more than you resemble anything else. It's true. Is there a mirror for the soul? Is there a reflection that you can glean, that you can gain of what God intended for you and me to look like, to stand before the powers of our time? And how best is a life like that framed? I want to take you tonight to look at one man like that. His name was Daniel, and he knew where to draw the lines. And to those of you about to graduate, on the eve of that graduation, you're drawing one line today. You're crossing over all the discipline of study that you've poured in, and all of the long hours are bringing you this reward of walking away from here with learning, understanding, experience, encountering mentors, and a certificate to remind you what you accomplished during this time. I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about the 3 lines that will be important for you to draw as you proceed from here. And you will learn from Daniel how he marched to a different drummer, the lines that he drew that helped him become a world changer. The first is this: he drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. He trained his hungers. There was nothing wrong with eating at the king's table. He could have had a banquet night after night, day after day, and enjoyed it. After all, he could have seen it as God's provision for him. A few weeks ago, I had a marvelous opportunity of speaking at the State Prayer Breakfast in Honolulu in Hawaii. You know, those are very hard invitations to turn down. It's interesting, shortly before that, the week before, I was speaking in Iowa. And every time people ask me, where were you going? I said, well, I was heading to Iowa to speak at the prayer breakfast. And they said, we'll be praying for you. Following week, they said, where are you going? I said, to the Hawaiian prayer breakfast. They said, have fun. That's the kind of image people have. Go there and have fun. But you know, in the itinerant life, there are these allurements, there are the seductions. Why would one want to go to Saskatoon in February when you can end up going instead to Honolulu and enjoy the scenery then. If you have a resistance to winter, you'd rather be in the Hawaiian temperatures rather than having to get a tired 3 or 4 layers of clothes. We move towards the direction of our comfort. We do. But the important thing is how God reminds us never to get so comfortable with comforts that it is the comfort principle that ends up driving all that you do. Here is a man who trained his appetite, training his longings, training his hungers. And the marvelous thing is this, how he reminded himself again and again that he did not want to get spoiled by all that the king would afford to him and give to him. Instead, he disciplined himself and backed away from even that which could have been all right for him to enjoy, but he resisted it for a greater and a higher call. I want to talk to you a little bit about training your hungers. The truth of the matter is that we make small decisions in the early days of our lives that often can put some deep desires within us that are not good for the long run and the long haul. I remember some years ago when I got a telephone call at 11 o'clock at night. My worldview changes after 9 p.m. I'm an early to bed guy. By 9 p.m., I don't want to discuss anything serious with anybody. I'd rather do it at 4 or 5 in the morning than after 9 p.m. So if anybody calls me after 9 or 9:30, I assume it's pretty urgent. I recognized the voice, and he said, "Ravi, you awake?" I said, "Not really. I was awakened by this telephone." He said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I want you to pray for me. I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble." This man was a medical doctor. He functioned in the emergency room. He said, "Tonight they brought a young woman in, so badly beaten, so brutalized, almost every major bone in her body was broken. And as she was wheeled in by the paramedics, they said, 'Doc, she's too far gone. There's nothing you can do.' He said, 'I looked at her battered body and I thought, this can't be it. I'm going to do my best to rescue her.' He said, 'I got scrubbed, called my team around me, and he said, the only hope I had was to give a direct heart massage. I slit the side of the rib cage, put my hand into that chest cavity so that I could hold the heart in my hand and keep pumping it to see if I could get some life back there.' He said, 'Just turned like blubber into my hands.' And he said, 'I walked away from there and I thought, what happened? Who did this to her? What was it all about?' He said, 'I was washing my hands literally with my eyes filled with tears. And the nurse comes with a bag full of paraphernalia, empties it onto a table, and she says, "Doc, you better take a look at this." It was all drug-related stuff, used needles and all the junk that was in that bag. He said, as I was looking at that, I was wiping my hands dry when I noticed, he said, I had nicked my finger when I put my hand into the rib cage. He said, I've cut myself. And I have made contact with terribly diseased blood. And he said, I'm a young father. I want you to pray for me. I said, is the cut deep? He said, no, it's about a paper-thin cut. I said, you're telling me that a paper-thin cut like this could put you in jeopardy for a disease that would take away all of your resistance to any other disease? He said, it doesn't take anything more than that. Doesn't take anything more than that. And I thought when I hung up and woke up the next morning reflecting on it, the first thought that came to my mind, first thought, can we put paper cuts to our soul early in life? Can we entertain a habit? Can we begin a relationship? Can we make a choice? Could it be one evening that lacerates you in such a way that puts a different kind of hunger into you and the destruction process can set in? To you young men especially, I want to give you this challenge. There are people out there with businesses and productions and ideas whose sole purpose is to cut you in your soul and get you hooked and reprogrammed so that you will then have hungers and passions and desires that no one human being on the face of the earth can ever fulfill. All they end up doing is framing your mind and creating within you a kind of imagination that is ultimately insatiable, never, ever satisfied. In this day of mass communication with computers and so on, we are living with a great deal of danger for our young people. I remember talking slightly about this on one occasion in a seminary setting in Midwestern Canada. I just mentioned this whole scourge of the pornographic empire. And at the end, when the invitation was given, every aisle in that auditorium was filled with kneeling men, tears running down their faces, wanting to retrain their hungers. My daughter had the privilege of coming here and speaking. Naomi, she works in the rescue of women and children from the prostitution industry. She's been pleading with me to write a book with her on pornography. She says, Dad, if I could only tell you the devastation this thing wreaks. And I have fought it off and fought it off and fought it off because I hate to even get into the research of something like this. Graduates, draw the line in the right places so that you can train your hungers. The second thing was he drew his line of resistance by training his appetite, but he drew also his line of dependence. What is that dependence? To go beyond the reading, to go beyond the learning, to seek wisdom. You see, Nebuchadnezzar did an extraordinary thing. He had this dream again and again. It was a culture in which dreams and visions meant an awful lot. And this repeated dream of a statue with a head and shoulders of gold, the breast, as it were, of silver, the girth made of bronze, the legs made of iron, and the feet of a mixture of iron and clay. And a stone cut out of no man's hand smashes that statue. And he wants to know what this means, what it all means. And so the magicians and the enchanters, very clever, they came one day and said, we will be able to interpret for you because you're threatening our lives otherwise. Just tell us the dream and we will interpret it. He said, not so quick, boys. You tell me the dream as well if you're that capable. And then you interpret it. You know, I grew up in India where we had these palmists and astrologers always telling us our future. I will never forget my mother bringing in one of these palmists to read the palms of my older brother, my two sisters, my younger brother, 5 of us. And he's going around looking at each one of the palm and giving them all these glorious future predictions. Then he holds mine in his hand and he looks at it and he goes, and my mother is standing there. I said, that's it. I'm being confirmed as a loser. And then he looks at me and he says, Ravi Baba, which is Ravi little boy. And then in Hindi he says to me, you're not going to travel at all in your life. You're going to be stuck right here. It was on a day where everybody wanted to go abroad. All I can say to you now is I hope I meet up with him someday. Because the only possible career for him is weather reporting. Because it's the only one where you can make so many mistakes and still have millions view you in living color and you still claim to your degrees. You're never going to travel very much. The enchanters and magicians were like that, and Nebuchadnezzar says, no, 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 you tell me what the dream is. So they're all going to have their heads lopped off. Saddam Hussein avowedly stated he wanted to build his empire like that of Nebuchadnezzar. He was patterning it after him. And so Daniel comes on the scene and he gets on his knees and he says, God, we're in trouble. I don't have the learning. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the books. Only you are able to tell me what the dream was. And God reveals it to him. It's a tough dream to talk to about Nebuchadnezzar. He goes and looks at Nebuchadnezzar and says, I want to tell you something. That which I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with my learning. It has nothing to do with my education. It has nothing to do with my intellect. It has everything to do with God's wisdom. And now I will unfold to you your dream. You can only learn so much from books. You can only learn so much from education. Ultimately, that which will carry you through will be the wisdom of God in the toughest situations of life. I remember a few years ago, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, asked 5 of us men to go with him to meet with the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders to try and bring them together. We'd worked hard for several days. We were exhausted. And that afternoon, they'd gone to see Yasser Arafat. I backed out of that. I just didn't feel it was right. I felt we were going to be used by him. As it turned out, it was right. That's on an aside. The last one we met with was Sheikh Talal, one of the 4 founders of Hamas. And he was a powerfully built man. Room filled with them puffing tobacco and so on. Served us a great meal. He'd spent 18 years in prison. He'd lost some of his children as suicide bombers. Archbishop Carey led in the talk, bringing him to a point, and then it was getting close to leaving time. He gave each one of us 5 men a chance to ask him one question. I asked him mine. I won't tell you what it was. It was a very private setting. But I didn't like his answer. Finally looked at him. I said, Sheikh Talal, you and I may never meet again. But I don't like your answer, sir, and I want to tell you something. So not far from where you and I are sitting, there's a mountain. 5,000 years ago, a man by the name of Abraham climbed up that mountain to offer his son as a sacrifice. Remember that? He said, yes. I said, let's not argue about which son it was. Let's just agree it was his son. He said, yes. I said, Abraham takes this boy up, and the axe is about to come down, and God stops that harm. He says, that's right. I said, what did God say? And he just stared at me. I said, you know what God said? God said, stop. I, myself, will provide. He said, that's right. I said, very close to where you and I are sitting, Sheikh Talal, 2,000 years ago, God kept that promise. And he took his own son up that hill. And this time the axe did not stop. He just kept staring at me. I said, Sheikh, until you and I receive the Son God has provided for you and me, we will be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for position, power, land, and prestige. There was such an obvious silence in the room. And the Archbishop said, I think it's time for us to go. I said, brother, I've blown it. I was walking up towards the stairs where we were to head down. And the Archbishop came around me and put his arm around me. And he said, Ravi, that was of God. I said, I sure hope so. I said, I want to tell you something, sir. I'd never thought of that before. It just happened now. He said, it was right. We walked down, and Sheikh Talal is coming at the back, and he runs to get the Archbishop into the car because he was the guest of honor, and then he runs over towards me. I thought, that's it. I'm going to be buried in Ramallah now. He comes over and turns me around. And he looks at me and he said, first patted me on both sides of the face. He said, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. I hope I will see you again someday. And he wipes the tear off, opens the car door after giving me a big hug, a kiss on both sides of the face, and helps me in. I don't know if I'll ever see him again, but I do know this much, that in that fraction of a moment, God gave me the privilege with His wisdom to share the story of the cross. Line of resistance The line of dependence. I want to tell you, graduates, outside of the cross of Jesus Christ, there is no hope in this world. That cross and resurrection at the core of the gospel is the only hope for humanity. Wherever you go, ask God for wisdom on how to get that gospel in, even in the toughest situations of life. Lastly, his line of confidence. His line of confidence. His line of resistance, his line of dependence, and his line of confidence. He knew that ultimately the truth would triumph. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? 3 monarchs in a row crossed over to his side of the line. He never crossed over to theirs. Remarkable, remarkable. That's what is a reflection of the soul that God intends for you and me. To draw the line in the right places, to be shaped for his purpose, to be able to stand before the toughest adversaries and to see that the difference will ultimately count. You know, it is fascinating when you look at China today. I was in Nanjing some years ago, and in 1966, Mao Zedong burned the seminary in Nanjing. And he said the Christian faith would be forever gone out of the country, never to return. Mao Zedong is dead and gone. The fastest growing church in the world today is in China. I want to close with 2 very simple illustrations. It was a few years ago that I had this experience, 3 years ago, when I was invited at that time to China, and the gentleman who invited me will be with me in 4 days from now. He had recently come to know Christ through some conversations we'd had, and he had powerful influence. He brought one of the highest members of the Politburo. I shall not even give the title, because it would not be right. We spent 3 hours plus answering her questions. She had represented China in 110 countries. And at the end of answering her questions, I said, "May I pray with you?" She said, "Yes, please." We bowed our heads and we finished praying, and I'll never forget her opening lines. She said, "Dr. Zacharias, I am in my 70s. This is the first time I have ever heard anybody praying." She said, "The only prayer I heard before this was 3 hours ago when you prayed for the food before we ate, as our host asked you to pray. I was shocked." She said, "Do you know what moved me? When your prayer began by first praying for the servants in the kitchen and thanking your God for them. In a classless society, that was the shattering of a wall before her." And what a thrill in the toughest regions of the world to see the transformation of lives. It's happening again and again and again. Graduates, you are facing a tough world. You are facing a changing world. You're facing a resistant world. You're facing a hostile world. But you know, the gospel story is always used to rising up and outliving its pallbearers. Take the message. It's live, it's powerful, it's transforming. And what I'd like to do is leave you with the words of the hymn that Charles Wesley wrote. "O thou who camest from above, the pure celestial fire to impart, kindle a flame of sacred love on the mean altar of my heart. There let it for thy glory burn with inextinguishable blaze, and trembling to its source return in humble prayer and fervent praise. Jesus, confirm my heart's desire to work and speak and think for thee. Still let me guard the holy fire, and still stir up thy gifts in me. Ready for all thy perfect will, my acts of faith and love repeat, till death thy endless mercy seal, and make my sacrifice complete." Draw the line of resistance. draw the line of dependence, and draw the line of confidence. And may God bless you as you see multiples of people crossing over from that side over to this to become followers of Jesus Christ.